Today I want to express my thanks for Brother Beloved, who is a profound preacher of the gospel. He's a change agent. When it happened by people with Reverend Marshall Hatch, get the Marshall Hatch.
Thank you so much, Reverend Jackson. Let's hear it again. Reverend Jesse Jackson, our hero, our champion, our long-distance runner, for all that he has done. We are certainly grateful for him, for his tremendous leadership for over 6 decades. And I tell you, we thank God again for the one and only Reverend Jesse Lewis Jackson, who has mentored so many of us down through the years, and of course, his mentorship, all of those that he has touched, you will find all over the country and all over the world, giving leadership in different places, all of us mentored by the one and only Reverend Jesse Lewis Jackson, whose impact will be felt for generations. And so we thank God for him today. Glad for Reverend Dr. Jeanette Wilson, and Reverend Pastor Derek Anderson, our friend and our brothers and sisters beloved. What a blessing it is to be Rainbow Push. Of course, if there was ever time that we needed in our tradition, prophetic ministry, we call it, it is such a time as this, to lift up. And I'm just trying to say that we need a push more now than ever. Somebody say, we need a push. We need a push. We need a Rainbow Push Coalition. We need a new moral vision, as Reverend Jackson has outlined, as Congressman Jackson has mentioned earlier in this program. Brothers and sisters, Chicago is again at, of course, the epicenter or the crossroads here in the central Midwest. Chicago, again, will give a testimony of what kind of nation we will be. Will we be America the beautiful, or will we be America the balkanized, separated and divided into warring factions? Will we be America the global moral leader, or America the global cheerleader who just simply sits on the sidelines and does not lead from the front but leads from the rear? The question is, why is the migrant crisis centered in Chicago today? And all of us who are paying attention to what we're looking at know that all of this is driven by political machinations, by political actors, by folks with political interests and political agendas. In fact, the crisis being centered in Chicago means that this is a trial run for manufactured disruption ahead of the Democratic National Convention coming to Chicago in August of next year. This is all a part of man-made, human-made chaos. It is literally a manufactured crisis. In fact, it is in the corporate interest to bring in a cheap labor force so that we will have a nation driven by a corporate capitalism, which means that we bust unions and we have low standards of living for the masses, as opposed to what I'd like to call a democratic capitalism, which means what? The right to organize, to have a high standard of living for everybody, to lift the boats from the bottom. No to corporate capitalism, yes to democratic capitalism and decentralized power and resource, and for resources literally to go into the grassroots. We need everybody to have a right to the tree of life. And so the question is, will we exploit migrants for cheap labor, which is what this is really all about, regardless to what the political actors are saying? They are not necessarily driving this policy as much as they are being driven by it. And so we have a choice to make. The migrant crisis is here at this epicenter in Chicago, a microcosm of a cynical political ploy to pit black people against migrant, especially women and children, who we see walking the streets with suitcases. And many of these families camped out at police stations in black communities. And we have to be careful that we don't fall for the okie doke. I grew up on the west side, what we call the 3-card Molly, where we are put in a position to make black people look less generous than we really are, to make us look less gracious than we really are. And bringing, as I live in Austin here in Chicago, the west side of Chicago, a community with many challenges, with our own challenges, with violence and deprivation of resources and closed schools and closed mental health clinics and biased appraisal of our property, where we are literally redlined and restricted. And then to have the migrants literally brought to black communities, somebody is trying to play an okie doke. I live in Austin, here in Chicago on the west side, and camped out at our police station, hundreds of migrants, and I see good people from Oak Park, 3 blocks away in River Forest, one of the most affluent communities in the Chicago metropolitan region, and they're coming in to the police station grounds with blankets and with water and with food, as if they're doing something good and honorable, and making it look as if black people are less generous and gracious as we are, when it only makes sense, since there are resources 3 blocks away in Oak Park, let's take the migrants where the resources are and not dump them in black and brown communities. Somebody is trying to pull one over on us. And so I want us to not fall for this scheme of trying to pit us against people who often have less than we have. And I'm proud of my community in Austin and Chicago. There has been a community organizing movement to save a park called Atmosson Park. We have a football league for children and after-school programs and senior programs. And somebody had the misguided idea that we ought to go into Austin and close the park for the residents in this community with all of the challenges and pathologies of the inner city. And this community organized to save their park for themselves. But it's not just that they did it. What I am most proud of is the way that they did it. When you look at the footage in the community meeting, they refused to denigrate the migrants. They refused to say what they did not deserve. They refused to be pitted against people who had less than they had. They were just simply being logical. Why would you come in a community that is already struggling when there is all of these affluent communities in Chicago with resources to help people to get on their feet? I like the way they did it. They refused to look less gracious than we really are. They were humane, They were determined to stand for what was right. Not just what was theirs, but it is right. That we cannot take away, we cannot abuse the defenselessness of those who came in the great migration of the 20th century to solve the migration of the 21st century. We should not take away from those who have less in order to solve what Reverend Jackson has said is an international crisis. Our community fought with logic, fought with compassion, fought with common sense, and in our tradition, we understood that we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but we wrestle against principalities, against people who are trying to pit us against folks who we really would like to help as well. But when we look around Chicago and look at a community, 50 closed schools. I pastor in West Garfield Park. 5 of the 50 schools were closed in West Garfield Park. Our community has been reeling from disinvestment. One study has said if we were to really invest in the black community in Chicago for what is really needed, what is really owed, what would really repair the imbalances, the number is more like $70 billion of investment. Why would we dump this crisis on people who have the less in the city, except there's a scheme to divide and conquer? And so we say in our tradition, we don't mind helping, but must the black community bear the cross alone and all the rest of the world go free? It's time to spread the responsibility. And so, brothers and sisters, I just want to close by saying we need a push now more than ever. Because what we need when we look at what's going on in the world, and Reverend Jackson has already said it, we need cooler heads. We need people who will stand for what's right. We need moral consistency. We need to know that, listen, we can be for something without being against somebody. We can be for our interests without being against somebody else's interests. You know, there's a Bible text. I am a preacher, not a politician. There's a Bible text. Now I talk a little slower than the other preacher from Dallas. There's a Bible text. John 18, 37 and 38 is when the preacher meets the politician, when the reverend meets the Roman, when the pastor meets the public official, when the moral theologian encounters the political theoretician, when Jesus of Nazareth has an encounter with Pontius Pilate. And Pilate, the political actor, says, "Are you a king?" Because all he's worried about is power and authority. Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world." And so Pilate said, "So you are a king." Jesus said, "I came to bear witness of the truth." The political actor Pilate said, "Then what is truth?" Not fully understanding that what truth is for a politician is not the same thing that truth would be for a preacher. What is truth? And that's what I've wrestled with this week. That's what I've wrestled with in this season. When I look at conflict all around the world and everyone insisting on their rights and their self-interest, I've asked myself as a preacher, what is true about what we are experiencing? Yes, sir. And so I looked not as a politician, but as a preacher. And I thought about at least 4 things quickly what I know are true for sure. In the midst of it all, the first thing I know that is true, it is always wrong to indiscriminately kill human beings. Now, it doesn't matter who it is, it doesn't matter what they consider their political interest to be, but to kill innocent people, to kill people who have nothing to do with your narrow political agendas is always wrong. And as a preacher, killing human beings indiscriminately, whether or not in Israel or the Gaza Strip, is always wrong. Second thing I know for sure is that you will never find out what's right just by standing or looking at your own rights. In other words, looking just at your own self-interest can never get you to righteousness. I heard Jesus saying, you've got to love your neighbor as you love yourself. You've got to get into somebody else's story and narrative. You've got to sometime walk in somebody else's shoes if you want to find a righteous path. You'll never find out what's right just by looking at your rights. Third thing I know for sure is that the more blessed you are, the more responsible you are. In other words, to whom much is given, much is required. In other words, if you have more power, if you have more resource, if you have more capacity, you have more ability, if you're really going to be righteous, you have to absorb the responsibility to address whatever the crisis is. You are response-able, meaning that somehow the universe, somehow God, somehow the cyclical, reciprocal, I feel a little Freddie Haynes-ism, is able to bring you the resources that you're now able to help somebody else. You are response-able because you have been blessed. And I don't know about anybody else. I know some of us have different stories. I grew up in public housing. My mother died when I was 8 years old. I was born at the bottom of this American empire when I was born in 1958, and my birth certificate said I was a Negro child. Everybody in the room knew what that meant but me. The doctor knew what it meant. The attending nurse knew what it meant. My mother and my father knew what it meant. The janitor in the hallway at Cook County Hospital knew that to be born a Negro in 1958 knew you were born with disadvantages. But then I got to tell the truth. God has blessed me anyhow. God has made a way for me anyhow. God has opened doors that no one can close and closed doors that no one can open. God has made a way out of no way. God has made a highway in the middle of the desert. God has enabled me to say I'm blessed anyhow. And if I was at New Mount Pilgrim on Sunday morning, I'd say, touch somebody and tell them I'm blessed. Anyhow. Listen, when you're blessed, that means you have a response-ableness. You're able to be bigger than those that are deprived when God has blessed you. To whom much is given, much is required. I know that for sure. And then let me be through, but the fourth thing that I know for sure is that to be a good person means that you have to be a force for good. And can I just tell you this, I'm through, but in this season, in this day and age, this time that God has allowed us to be born in this second decade of the 21st century, I want you to know that you have to decide whether or not you will be a force for good. I know we like to talk about identity politics. I know we like to talk about intersectionality, but when you get through boiling it down, you've got to look your own self in the mirror. You've got to go into your own home at night and ask, have I given anything today? You have to ask yourself, have I been a force for good?
Yes, yes.
And brothers and sisters, I want you to know the only way to be good is to be a force for good. To be light in the darkness, to be salt in the earth, to be a person that gives a helping hand to somebody in need. The only way to be a good person is to do good.
Yes, sir.
Well, I know how it feels to be in this kind of secular society where folk actually are tired of being good, tired of doing well, where there's always a what about me and a what about what I need. But I'm come to tell you that it's a blessing to be a blessing, that if you want to be good, you got to learn how to be good in a bad situation. And we're in a bad situation, but I thank God that God has called some of us to rise above the situation. God has called some of us to rise above the circumstance. God has called us to rise above political divisions. Somebody say, Lord, lift me up and let me stand. Plant my feet on higher ground. Yeah, I'm so glad that I got a call and I have a charge. Yes, I do. I heard the voice of Jesus saying, oh, come on to me and rev. Yeah, it's good to be good. Can I tell you why? Because God favors the good. The good you do is sometime not returned. But I'm so glad that Jesus left a testimony when you get crucified for the good that you've done. God is able. Somebody say, he's able to raise you up. Somebody say, yeah. Somebody say, yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Have I given anything today? Have I helped somebody along the way? Just to know I've done my best when I go take my rev. Yeah. Can I holler for the ancestors one more time? Somebody say yeah. Yeah.